thanks everybody for joining us. This should be a fun and hopefully action-packed conversation. Raf, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about Altitude Sports for those who are below the Canadian border?
Yeah, so we are an e-commerce company based in Montreal, Canada. We're basically the backcountry of Canada, we could say, I think. So we sell only online, everything in sporting good, outdoor industry. So we're really big in camping, trekking, skiing, and everything that Canadians love to do during the winter.
Thanks for that. Now, obviously, Raf, Jason, and I enjoy hanging out together, but also we're sitting on stage because we all are working together on this project that you guys have been investing quite some time and money into as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what that project is, what prompted the change, and kind of why you picked who you did, and actually the order that you did that in?
Sure. So we have two channels. We have altitudesports.com, our main channel, and we have thelastton.com, our discounted channel. So about 18 months ago, we started to look at the unit economics of the discounted channel and really wanted to first optimize and move away from our monolithic e-commerce platform to optimize, obviously, for site speed conversion, but also just optimize the cost and our ability to innovate, push the market. So we started this big transition about 18 months ago, and I'm happy to say that 4 weeks ago exactly, we went live with the new project. So we did it.
I know. We like that. We like that. Live is good. Live and functional is even better. Okay, so what are the pieces of that? Because I'm curious, there are multiple pieces, not just Orium and Contentful, and obviously Vercel in the mix. Yeah. What did you start with?
So we first started by selecting a new e-commerce platform, headless composable e-commerce platform. And then we reached out to the folks at Orium who help us basically design the ecosystem around it. So we picked Vercel as a front-end stack, obviously Next.js to have a good developer experience, Contentful to help the marketing team and the other stakeholders manage and operate the website. And Commerce Tool finally as the backend engine for this new stack. Okay,
so what intrigues me is like some of those things actually kind of happened in parallel, like Contentful and Vercel, for example, were a combination kind of choice for you guys. And talk a little bit about that.
It was crazy. It was a quite crazy period where we basically first selected Commerce Tool as the main platform. Then we realized that we needed to find a bunch of providers around it. And I think under like 2-3 months, we went to the market, talked to a bunch of partners. Orium were really great help during this discovery phase to really analyze the different vendors. And at the end, we crossed the finish line, I think, about 12 months ago, where we finalized our selection to the partner we have right now. But it was a bit crazy to select all the vendors at the same time. But the reality is that the like built-in integration, their ability to work together as well to better support us was a big value in the project.
What strikes me is like we see that pattern, I'm sure, between the two of us actually fairly often. Like these two things tend to happen in parallel. But I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about what the big factors were that you were trying to evaluate vendors for. How did you identify the needs across the organization that were the real priorities that you needed to meet?
It was mainly with collaboration with our stakeholders internally, so to really understand the needs of our different stakeholders. And the reality is that the old monolithic e-commerce platform that we were using was offering a bunch of amazing tools, for example, draft orders that customer service were using to basically fix a bunch of problems. So we had to dig a little bit to really understand why they were using exactly draft orders to solve what problem exactly. And then to create a roadmap to say, look, maybe we don't need draft orders in the new stack. Maybe we actually need 2 or 3 different solutions that will be really tailored to the problem that we're solving. So I think by collaborating with our internal stakeholders, we're able to create that roadmap. And then from there, pick the vendors that were able to solve specific problems.
So Jason, I'm curious what that looked like from your perspective, from Orium's standpoint in this, because I know the approach that you guys take is a very collaborative one. So this is about jumping right in, but how did you guys think about meeting those different requirements and expectations? And I guess also, kind of thinking differently about what you were actually trying to do in the first place with this new tech stack?
I think that part of what we were looking at, obviously you start with customers, we look at the internal users, that's pretty common. I think a big part of what we were trying to approach in conjunction with RAF was what's going to serve the whole business?
Yeah.
How might this business grow in year 2, 3, 5? Because I think for most people who are here at this event, probably like you're trying to innovate to serve new customers in the channels they want, the ones you don't foresee yet. So we were trying to go through that exercise too and make sure that at least where we were writing more custom work and adaptation, that it wasn't going to box us in there, but also that where we were picking vendors, that they were ones that were going to kind of grow with altitude over time.
It's interesting too, because I think this idea of like there being needs that are going to change and evolve and come through over time is actually a really big one, especially as you're trying to solve for a lot of different parts of the organization. And clearly there were some priority technical requirements, and the dev team had, I'm sure, a long list of priorities that they wanted to meet. But part of this is about changing the operational approach as well. And I know I can speak for having been on the other end of that, on the content and marketing side, and realizing that actually part of that change means we're not just looking at how we get to market differently, but a lot of the processes that are about how we work together across different parts of the organization to make that happen. I'm curious if there were any particular kind of lessons in those early stages of like what not to do. What are some of the pitfalls? Either that you guys, Jason, already knew about that you wanted to help avoid, or Raf, that you guys experienced along the way and were able to pivot around and address?
Do you want me to start with that one, maybe from the early days?
Yep.
we see, because composable is all we do. That's our core specialty. And so what we often, when we're speaking with the team, often start with like a blank slate. And the reality is, especially in e-commerce, there are patterns here.
Yes.
There's combinations that go together. And the biggest thing is like, there's usually some form of starting point that you don't have to start from zero. Yeah. And one of the biggest mistakes we honestly see is just teams starting from zero, right? So I think it's really critical to start with, what are open source options out there, options backed by the vendors you're choosing. Start with something. It gives a framework to begin with, and then you can modify and extend. It's just finding what's right for you. And so we were able to partner up on some of that. Some of it also then is the buy versus build, right? Like, let's be really critical about what we're building. And where we can buy, because when we can buy, we're going to be able to pick a vendor then that should grow with you over time. And they're constantly unlocking new roadmap, new integrations. In the world of AI, they're thinking about how AI applies in their domain. So a lot of it to begin was just kind of setting the right foundation there.
I agree. To build on that, one thing that we've learned through the process is also to not take performance for granted.
Yep.
I think it's really easy to like open terminal, do like create next app, deploy that on Vercel. Performance would be like freaking amazing. Then to start to build ad features, ad library, things like that, maybe one mistake we did was to start from a really solid foundation, but then to lose a little bit track of the performance, and then to come back by the end of the project a few weeks before the big go live to then realize, oh, maybe we need to optimize a little bit more. Maybe we need to be a little bit more intentional about how we manage cache during deployments, things like that. So that was probably the biggest learning for me in this project.
I mean, I know as well, again, this is partly about having an alignment of interests across the different departments too, because it's not just the front end, it's the entirety of the MarTech stack sometimes that has a big influence there, because you can have great performance and then start layering on all kinds of interesting MarTech tools that suddenly are counterproductive as well.
For sure.
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
No one ever has done that in this room.
The problem is that's primarily a governance. It's a people problem, not a technology. I mean, there's some technology solved, but it's primarily a people problem. Yeah.
Well, so maybe that's a good point to start talking about some of the unlocks that you found in how you're improving the way that not just the technical teams work, but how the non-technical teams work and how they work together.
Feature branch for us was like the biggest impact, I think, of the project internally. We came from like a world prior to the big transition where doing a new deployment was taking us maybe like 3 weeks overall. And obviously, when it takes 3 weeks to do a deployment with all the manual testing and everything, the teams are getting scared a little bit of deploying new things because they know that if something is broken, we'll have to live with that for a while, right? So this ability to deploy something really quickly during the development process, to show that to our internal stakeholders, was a really good way for us to show transparency, build trust with them, and bring them into the fast iteration process. So we really saw a lot more collaboration, faster feedback loop when we're working on more feature. And as a result, I think our stakeholders, internal stakeholders, were having way more trust within the tech team. The tech team also were just trusting itself a lot more, and so that just increased velocity quite rapidly.
I'm curious because I know you have stuff to add here too, and I also want to come back to this idea of like the philosophy of engagement being everyone is part of a collaborative team, like between the client, between Orium, but we're also talking about extending that to how the teams internally within Altitude Sports are working too, right?
Yeah, so if I think of, we'll see brands approach us and say, we're not happy with this new headless front end that our team, built.
Yep.
And what we find, unfortunately, sometimes is it's actually exceptional performance, probably pretty well done, but that collaboration with the business stakeholders wasn't perhaps quite where it needed to be. So they've missed key workflows, key points of control that they needed to be able to self-administer. Maybe they didn't model the content as efficiently as it could have been. But I mean, increasingly, done with that consultation throughout the process, and especially as, let's say Vercel, increasingly you have CMS and front-end support coming together better and better. There shouldn't be an issue if you're thinking about it throughout the process. The key is think about it throughout the process. At the end is too late. I think your team actually engaged quite well on that, but that's not always the case.
Yeah.
And it's just something sometimes you can't work back. We'll see pressure all of a sudden. There's an excellent front end that's been built, and we're seeing pressure from the business to go back to what they had before.
Because that was easier, and they knew how that worked.
It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that we see quite a lot too is, to your point on content modeling, there's a lot of implicit connection in a content model. And that is another area that requires tremendous collaboration to get right. And I think part of this is understanding that it's a process and it's not like it's a one and done type of thing. So there's a starting point, and chances are you're not going to get that 100% right on the first. I'm guessing you guys didn't.
Nope.
No. And so there's a necessary kind of interrelationship in that iteration. So it's actually having that kind of thing to organize around, to actually work toward a common objective that makes everybody's lives easier and everyone able to do their best work ultimately. So.
I think it's also important to add that, yes, there's a starting point, there's a process, but the reality is that there's not really an ending point. So something we've learned as well is we start the project, we have those new tools, it's improving the trust, collaboration is there, but then we need to show up every day to invest in this collaboration, to invest in this trust, and to make sure that if, for example, the marketing team is having new ideas about the new content model they want, well, they come to see us, and this collaboration is ongoing, because we're obviously not talking about a project, we're talking about a project with no end date. So we need to keep up the collaboration as well.
One of the things that strikes me about this is that we're here talking about performant commerce front ends. But there are a lot of ways that we can interpret speed and performance here. And one of those is about the relationship that we're putting our colleagues in order to do that kind of high performance, highly agile work. And I just want to touch on this idea of being able to collaborate in these systems, and particularly to do that with a visual interface, because I know that's been kind of an important feature of making that work for you guys as well. Do you want to talk a bit about it?
Sure. Briefly talk about the feature branch, but again, feature branch was something really, really big for us, and just bring all the collaboration inside of one clear area. Also help people understand just the development process, understand what the branch is, how Git works, and things like that. So it was really good for that.
Marketers Git? What? Yeah.
I would say sometimes there's a misperception too that things like visual preview, visual editing are just no longer possible in a headless world, and that's a misconception. That's not the case anymore. And so planned early on with the stakeholders, I think you can go a long way to make sure that they understand. Actually, you probably have more power and performance compared to what you're used to.
Well, we saw some of that in the demo earlier this morning. But what's interesting is that works both ways too. And I think part of what we're working on jointly more and more is the ability to be visualizing stuff in Vercel that connects into Contentful, for example, and actually have live preview in Contentful that connects back into Vercel deployments. And so depending on which team is working where, they can work in whatever is most comfortable. But the point is everybody has a chance to see and understand and really grasp what's going on in some very intuitive ways.
You talked earlier about kind of how do you make thoughts or selections around technical stack, and I think the power of some of what you're talking about there comes into you want something that's going to be performant, allows you to innovate, allows you to adapt, but also there is an ecosystem component. So when we think of vendors, often part of why we see the pairing is those vendors are not just integrated, but they're constantly innovating together.
Yeah.
And so thinking about that as part of the standard of who you choose to be your tech partners, I think is really critical.
Lots of good stuff there. But I'm conscious that we've got a few more minutes left, and there might well be some questions from the crowd. Anybody have questions? You guys want to raise anything for Ralph, certainly, or any of us?
I want the person who's going to ask Ralph a question in French. That's
Yeah, bien sûr.
Yeah, my question is, what e-commerce engine did you use before this? And did you do this as a phased rollout or a big bang? Because the whole point of Composable is to do it in pieces. You can compose your solution. So what was the strategy and what was the commerce engine before this?
So, sorry, I didn't get the second part of your question. So
did you do a big bang rollout, like a launch, or did you do a phased rollout of the site?
So we used to be on Shopify, and one of our 2 websites is still on Shopify. So basically, right now we're running this big A/B test of Shopify versus a maybe more modern tech stack with Commerce Tool. In terms of go live, we've decided to do a kind of a big bang approach. So that was hell of a night 4 weeks ago to just deploy everything. But that was the easiest thing because we also changed a few systems in the backend, the way we manage inventory, the way we manage the marketplace and other systems as well. So it was just easier to shut down the website, do the launch, and thank you.
Sorry, over here. I was going to ask the same shopping platform question, so I'll switch a little bit. What did you see from performance? So you've gone next, and I was still seeing altitude sports on Shopify on Wappalizer. So which domain did you move, just so that we can go and have a little geeky look around it? And obviously the other question is what performance impact, page speed, core web vitals, conversions even would be handy if you can share.
Cool. Makes sense. Before I answer, we need to be careful because I think we're not comparing apples with apples right now because we're having a really old, I would say, Shopify platform. We're not using the headless platform of Shopify and everything. One thing I could say for sure is that in terms of velocity, in terms of capability of just innovation, it's way, way, way faster right now. And the devs overall, I think they much prefer the new stack. So that's good, I think, for the engagement, for the value that we can bring to the market. In terms of specifics for conversion rate, it's hard to say because we're still in the first 3 months of the go live. So it's a little bit bumpy, but we're quite happy with the direction that everything is taking right now. But again, it's too early to share any specifics.
I'll just jump in there and add, we have other customers that are using Shopify, Vercel, and Contentful that have probably a more recent implementation of Shopify that are actually seeing really significantly improved results as well. So there are lots of options here. There are lots of combinations that can work really effectively. Anyone else?
En premier, félicitations, Raph. I wanted to ask you, how big is your team? Il y a combien de développeurs à Montréal?
Sorry, I don't see you. Where? Oh, merci beaucoup. Question is how many developers we have right now?
Well, it took 18 months. I'm just kind of curious, for a transformation like this.
So we have a tech team of about 40 people. out of those 40 people, we have like folks on the data team, we have PMs, we have UXers, and we have engineers, developers. So developers, we are about at 30 developers right now. And during the transition to accelerate the project, we created a squad in partnership with Orium. So basically, Orium gave us half of a squad, and we've gave a few developers to create this new squad that was in charge of the transition.
I would say that's the most common way that we pair up. It's often not a complete outsource. It's not done internally. It's a hybrid in between, and running that for 6 to 12 months. What I would say is, Raf's team, you have significant kind of in-house tech capability. What's really changed in particular in the last year is there are turnkey options that we can deploy now with 2 or 3 FTEs end-to-end. So some of it is your vendor choice, what you want to do. There's more and more options to get the benefits of that more kind of mock-oriented stack without the need for a big team.
I will say, just to add from my perspective, looking at some of the customers that I know well too, this type of approach works really well because you want that injection of outside expertise from past experience, a broader customer base, having seen some of the patterns we were talking about before, so that you're not starting from zero. But if you are not deeply involved as the customer organization, you're just going to be missing out on those opportunities to really innovate and experiment. And I know that's a core part of the team's DNA that you've been building as well.
No, exactly. Like what we were operating through this project is obviously like new technology, new stack, but that's not the end goal, right? We also wanted to change the culture of the business, and a good way for us to do that was to inject like a little bit of Orium's culture to help us be more agile, to understand really the latest tool and make sure that we work with a partner that already has a ton of experience with it and goes, yes, with like feature branch and Vercel and Next and having a solid template to start with, but also just went with like, how do we measure the performance of the team or a sprint and things like that? And as a business and even as a CTO, I've learned a lot through this experience, so that was great.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to wrap up on. So thanks to all of you. Thanks both of you for joining me up here. Great, thanks.